It begins with a dream, solid and real as concrete and steel. Have you ever held your entire future in your hands? Not as a hope, but as a keycard, a title on a door, the weight of a well-tailored blazer on your shoulders? For Ella Thorne, that dream was her office on the 18th floor of the Apex Tower. It was her father's legacy and her own ambition, fused into one gleaming structure that pierced the city sky. She was the director of operations for NextGen Dynamics, a tech giant that filled the building with noise and purpose. And she was, though almost no one at the company remembered it, the woman who owned the building itself. Her father, Marcus Thorne, was an architect with a singular vision. He poured his soul into the blueprints of the Apex Tower, a monument not to corporate greed, but to human ingenuity. When he fell ill, the project became his final race. On his deathbed, he gripped his daughter's hand and made her swear to protect his masterpiece. "It's yours, Ella. Keep it safe. Make it mean something." She was 24, heartbroken, and fiercely determined. She finished the construction, becoming the youngest major property owner in the city. And to secure its future, she signed its largest space to NextGen, welcoming their dynamic CEO, Vivian Sterling, into her father's house. Vivian was everything Ella admired and everything she was not. Razor sharp, effortlessly commanding, a sculptor of billion-dollar empires. She saw in Ella not just a landlord, but a useful asset. "Don't just collect our rent," Vivian had said, her smile a perfect blend of warmth and calculation. "Come work for us. Oversee your own building. Learn from the inside." To Ella, it was the perfect union. For 5 years, she served NextGen with a proprietor's pride, saving them millions, rising through the ranks, believing she was part of a family. Vivian called her a protégé, and Ella, in her quiet way, believed her. The tapestry of her life, her father's legacy and her own career, was woven tightly, beautifully. But a silent crack was spreading in the foundation. Vivian Sterling's ambition was a living thing, always hungry. She conceived Project Olympus, a secretive initiative that would require not just space in the Apex Tower, but total dominion over it. The tower was to become NextGen's global flagship, and Vivian could not abide having a landlord, especially one who sat in her staff meetings. The betrayal, when it came, was not born of passion but of cold, surgical corporate strategy. It happened on a Tuesday. Ella was called into Vivian's corner office. The sunlight was cruel in its cheerfulness. Vivian was not alone. A woman from legal and a stone-faced security had flanked her. "Ella, please sit," Vivian began, her voice coated in a synthetic sympathy that made the air feel thin. "This is incredibly difficult." The words that followed were hollow corporate ghosts. Strategic pivot, synergy, reduction in force. They meant nothing and everything. "Your position has been eliminated. Effective immediately." The floor beneath Ella seemed to dissolve. Eliminated. 5 years of loyalty, of solutions provided, of midnight oil burned, eliminated. In her own building. She was a ghost in her own home. Before the shock could even settle, Vivian performed the second act of the play. She slid a document across the vast, cold desk. "We know this is a shock, and we want to be supportive. We're prepared to make a generous offer to purchase the Apex Tower. Today. It would give you financial security, a clean break." Ella's eyes scanned the number. It was an insult, half the tower's true worth. This was the masterstroke. Fire the owner. Make her feel small, disposable, and financially vulnerable. Then, swoop in with a predator's lifeline. The sheer, breathtaking cruelty of it, the timing, the manipulation, froze Ella's blood. But in that deep freeze, something hardened. She looked from the pitiful number to Vivian's expertly arranged mask of pity, to the security guard waiting by the door. A profound, eerie calm settled over her. She did not cry. She did not plead. She simply said, her voice a quiet, steady thing in the roaring silence, "I'll need to review this. With my lawyer." Vivian's smile flickered, a glitch in her perfect program. "Of course. But the offer is only good for 48 hours. A sign of our urgent needs." Ella stood. She did not shake hands. She collected the few personal items from her desk under the watchful eye of security, a photo of her father, a worn coffee mug, and was escorted out of the lobby, onto the sun-drenched sidewalk. She stood there, a box in her arms, and looked up at the Apex Tower. The sun glared off its windows, a blinding, beautiful tombstone. In that moment, the Ella Thorne who believed in corporate families died. And someone else was born. Someone with a legacy to protect and a cold, clear blueprint for revenge now unfolding in her mind. Vivian Sterling had made her first and last catastrophic mistake. She had fired the woman who owned the building. She had awakened the guardian of the cornerstone. Revenge, for Ella, was not an emotion. It was an architectural draft. It required patience, precision, and an intimate knowledge of the structure you intended to remodel. She didn't go home to despair. She went to her father's archives. In her modest home office, surrounded by Marcus Thorne's original sketches and stress calculations, she began her own project. She called it Project Legacy. Her goal was not to destroy the tower, that was her father's heart, but to make it utterly uninhabitable for Vivian's dreams. She started with the lease, a document she knew better than anyone. Any major renovation, like those required for Project Olympus, needed the landlord's written approval. A slow, grim smile touched her lips. Leverage point 1. She then examined NextGen's public financial filings. Project Olympus wasn't just an idea, it was the narrative Vivian was selling to shareholders. The company's inflated stock price depended on it. The pressure was immense. Leverage point 2. Finally, she thought of people. Vivian ruled by fear, not loyalty. Ella reached out to the overlooked, a facilities manager, a former assistant. She learned of a culture of burnout, of safety checks bypassed to save money. An army of the discontented waited in the wings. Leverage point 3. Her plan was a symphony in 3 movements. First, the silent siege. She would become the most by-the-book landlord in history, using bureaucracy, requests for independent studies, and historical preservation reviews to slow Vivian's timeline to a crawl. Second, the foundation crack. She would anonymously feed truths about NextGen's toxic culture to a business journalist, tarnishing Vivian's pristine image. Third, the forced eviction. Using a morality clause in the lease and evidence of negligence, she would move to legally evict NextGen for cause. She hired a lawyer, David Chin, whose brilliance was matched only by his disdain for bullies. She had a quiet, off-the-record conversation with a journalist. Then she waited. The call from Vivian's lawyer came on the 47th hour. The offer expires soon. Your client would be a fool not to take it. Following Ella's script, David replied with calm lethality. My client finds your offer deficient. She will not be selling. However, she is ready to discuss your renovation plans as per Section 7C of the lease. The silence on the other end of the line was the first sweet note of justice. The war was declared not with a shout, but with a footnote. What followed was a silent, relentless tightening of a vice. Vivian, expecting a desperate plea, was buried in an avalanche of legal parchment. Ella approved the first, tiny renovation step, the moving of a single non-load-bearing wall, but her approval letter came with a 17-page addendum requiring seismic analyses and air quality plans. It would take weeks. Furious, Vivian called. This is ridiculous obstruction, Ella. Ella's voice was pure, polite ice. I'm protecting my asset, Vivian, as any responsible owner would. My father's standards were very high. She hung up. The student had become a master of the art of corporate blockade. While Vivian's team drowned in paperwork, the journalist's article hit. Behind the glass facade, burnout and bypass safeties at NextGen Dynamics. It quoted unnamed employees, cited leaked memos. The stock price stuttered. Investor calls grew anxious. Vivian was now fighting on 2 fronts, a paralyzed project and a PR fire. She gave aggressive interviews, which only shone a brighter spotlight on the very project stuck in quicksand. Then Ella initiated the final movement. The notice of lease termination for cause arrived at NextGen by certified mail. It cited hazardous work environments, damage to the building's reputation, and failure to obtain proper approvals. It gave them 90 days to vacate. In Vivian Sterling's world, this was an extinction-level event. Eviction? It would be a humiliating, stock-cratering, career-ending scandal. Her board of directors, once sycophants, now had panic in their voices. The cornered predator attacked. NextGen sued, alleging malicious interference. They dragged Ella into a deposition, a sterile room where they hoped to break the quiet, bitter ex-employee. They asked about her motives, implying she was petty, emotional, unstable. Ella, guided by David, was an impassive fortress. She spoke not of feelings, but of building codes, fiduciary duty, and the duty of care a tenant owes. She presented their own shoddy engineering reports. She was calm, precise, and devastating. The final question came from Vivian's sneering lawyer. "Miss Thorne, isn't this all just a pathetic attempt to get back at Miss Sterling for firing you?" Ella looked past him, directly at Vivian, who sat shrouded in the room's shadows. Ella allowed herself a small, cold smile. "This isn't about getting my job back," she said, her voice clear as a bell. "This is about my father's legacy, and I will protect it from anyone who tries to exploit it, even the CEO of NextGen Dynamics." In that moment, Vivian Sterling knew. She wasn't fighting a person. She was fighting a principle. And she was losing. The legal battle raged, but the 90-day clock ticked louder than any gavel. Investors fled. The board revolted. The perfect storm Ella had engineered was now a hurricane consuming Vivian's empire. Faced with total ruin, Vivian had one move left: surrender. She requested a meeting, not with lawyers but with Ella. They met in the same boardroom where Ella had been fired. The power had performed a perfect, poetic inversion. Ella sat, poised and quiet. Vivian looked stripped of her armor, just a tired woman in an expensive suit. "What do you want, Ella?" she asked, all pretense gone. Ella placed a single document on the table. "A new lease." "I want what I've always wanted," Ella said. "For my father's building to be treated with respect." The terms were a masterpiece of justice. NextGen's rent was tripled, retroactively, a multi-million-dollar penalty. An independent oversight committee, chosen by Ella, would monitor all operations. NextGen would publicly retract their lawsuit and praise the building's standards. And Vivian Sterling would resign as CEO. But the most profound clause was this: Project Olympus was terminated. Vivian's legacy project was erased by the signature of the woman she'd fired. Vivian read the terms, her hands betraying a faint tremor. To sign was professional death. Not to sign was total annihilation. She looked at Ella, and in that glance, Ella saw not a monster, but a ruined gambler who had bet everything on greed and lost. "My father built this place with his hands," Ella said softly. "You tried to take it with a spreadsheet. Some things can't be bought." With a hand that seemed weighed down by the entire tower, Vivian Sterling picked up the pen and signed. It was the sound of an empire falling silent. The news broke like a quiet tide. NextGen CEO steps down amid strategic shift. Apex Tower remains NextGen HQ under restructured lease. Vivian vanished from the spotlight, a cautionary tale. Ella Thorne did not return to a desk at NextGen. She used the retroactive rent, the penalty for betrayal, to establish the Marcus Thorne Foundation, funding scholarships for young architects. She became the full-time steward she was always meant to be. Sometimes, revenge is not about destruction. It's about reclamation. It's about taking back your name, your legacy, your power, and using it to build something true. Ella learned that the most dangerous person in a glass tower is not the one shouting orders from the top floor. It's the quiet one who holds the deed, who knows every stress point in the foundation, who remembers that before there was a corporation, there was a dream. Vivian Sterling fired the woman who owned the building, thinking she was removing an obstacle. In truth, she was summoning a reckoning. And she proved, for everyone to hear, that true power doesn't come from a title on a door. It comes from your name on the cornerstone.